What I want to do is talk about the role that academic institutions can play in land conservation. And I added Jim Levitt as a co-author as I started putting this talk together, because I realized so much of what I was dredging up out of the back of my mind was actually channeling somehow to Jim. He's in Australia right now, and I'll explain why in a minute. So, my talk today, I have three main areas. First, I'm going to talk about some of these emerging networks when it comes to academic institutions and conservation. Specifically, I'll talk about the Conservation Catalyst Network and then this new network called ALPiNE. Then I'll look at a case study at the University of Maine where we're doing alternative futures modeling in two large watersheds. And the idea there is to break down kind of these interdisciplinary silos on campus and engage different publics and make sure that the work that we do is relevant and used. And then finally, I'll talk about the next steps for ALPiNE. So some background on the Conservation Catalyst Network. This has been going on for about 3 or 4 years. And it's a worldwide network, very much growing. This is something that Jim at Harvard Forest and Lincoln Institute has been pioneering. And if you look at that map, and if we blow that up, we've got member institutions across the world. But if you focus on New England, we've got a lot of folks up here in New England that are very much engaged in working with RCPs and other groups in actually making conservation work on the ground. So ALPiNE, or Academics for Land Protection in New England, basically, it's a group that came together beginning in January, and we're basically looking at ways to kind of harness the power, the energy, the institutional capacity of academic institutions in New England to try to bring that to bear on land conservation issues. And obviously, you can see a very strong and natural connection with the RCP network. Our motto is to connect, collaborate, and conserve. Some folks just came up with that this past week. So we realized we had to get this on the website and needed something catchy. And then really what we're after is how can we catalyze the pace and scale of conservation across New England. And if you look at the web page there for Wildlands and Woodlands, we now have a little link there to a section on ALPiNE. You can go and read about that and hopefully contribute if you guys are working with different institutions around the state or around the region. Okay, so why ALPiNE? I hope most folks are familiar with this graphic that shows forest cover percentages across New England from 1600. This is out of the Wildlands and Woodlands report. And we can see that we've experienced over the last 100 or so years, 150 years, a real increase in forest cover, which is remarkable because at the same time we've also had an increase in population. But if you're familiar with wildlands and woodlands, we're at this point now where we're starting to see the loss of forest cover in all 6 New England states. And in many ways, this is kind of irreversible. These are subdivisions and parking lots and shopping malls that are going in and converting forest. So that's one reason why I think we need to become engaged at the academic level in this. The other thing is if you look at some recent work by the U.S. Forest Service that looks nationwide at projected loss of forest land over the next 20 or 30 years, New England figures quite prominently. And here the pink and darker areas in the reds are areas that are projected to see large decreases in the loss of private forest land. Okay, so what are some of our assets? Well, it turns out we've got an awful lot to build on. So for historical and practical reasons, ALPiNE makes a lot of sense. We've got some of the oldest institutions, Harvard going back to 1836, Yale 1701, Brown 1764, Dartmouth 1769. These institutions actually predate our nation. So these are institutions that are older than the United States that endure. Many of us also think that this is the birthplace of land conservation in North America. Things like the Boston Common and the Trustees Reservations. We have a lot of academic institutions in place right now. If we look at colleges and universities, we've got 186 scattered across the 6 New England states. If we add community colleges, and there's no reason why not to, that brings the number up to 235. And then why not think about high schools? We've got a lot of high schools across the state with students that are eager to get out and get involved and actually try to figure out what it is they want to do with their lives and in college, and having opportunities to work with RCPs is a fantastic way to get them engaged in the community and start to figure out what they want to do with the rest of their lives. 1.2 million full and part-time students in these institutions. And we see an increasing trend. So that trend, the number of students has been increasing through time, and right now comprises about 4.5% of total college student enrollment in the country. Also important is that these students reflect the diversity of our society, and literally they are the future of our society. So if we can get them engaged in land conservation, we can do an awful lot for the future in making sure that what we do endures. And not only are colleges and academic institutions comprised of faculty and students, but they also have huge alumni networks as well. They also have parents, and hopefully they're not too irritated by still paying off those student loans. But if you wrap that all together, literally there are tens of millions of people that have these ties to these academic institutions, and it's something that we can really work with and leverage. Just one example, a lot of these colleges have lands that they own and manage. At the University of Maine, we have about 14,000 acres across the state. If you look around Orono, our main campus, we have about 11,000 acres that we use. We manage those lands, we train students there. They're great starting points. Okay, now I want to talk quickly about a case study that illustrates how academic institutions and stakeholders can work together to solve different types of problems. The Maine Sustainability Solutions Initiative, it just ended this summer. It was a 5-year NSF grant. And once again, we had these 3 main focal areas of interdisciplinary research, stakeholder engagement, and then knowledge to action. So making sure that what we did at the Academy didn't just get published somewhere and forgotten, but was actually picked up and used and made a difference in the world. Our study area, 2 very large study areas. The Lower Penobscot, about 2.5 million acres, and then also the Casco Bay region around Portland, almost 2 million acres, 1.9 million acres. And what we wanted to do was try to figure out how these landscapes would change through time and really come up with a way to be proactive in how we conserve land. So many times we're reactive. We see the survey stakes out there and we react to that. And our thinking was, is there a way we can get ahead of the development pressures and try and predict where development will be 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now and protect those important lands before they're actually under threat. Why? Well, because it's a lot less expensive to do so. So what is alternative futures modeling? These are spatially explicit models that depict different landscape futures under different drivers of landscape change. And we can think of things like population pressures, economic pressures, biophysical constraints on the land. And the real question is, how does a landscape like this change through time into something like that? And this is an example from the Wasatch Front, some work we did in futures modeling there about 10 years ago. And the key is to anticipate different land use futures and then be able to explore through different scenarios how we might be able to put in place policies today to create a better world for all of us tomorrow. So when it comes to the Penobscot area and our 2 case studies, we're interested in strategic conservation. This was explicitly looking at questions like, what is it that we want to protect and why do we want to protect it? Where should we focus our efforts? How do we enact protection? Is it fee simple ownership? Is it conservation easements? We've got a growing toolbox to do this. Who are the players in realizing protection? And more we've got a broad range of interest from businesses to colleges and universities and RCPs that are engaged in this. And then how do we ensure endurance? And then how do we evaluate success? Normally we evaluate success in the number of acres, but if we're forced into that kind of a metric, we end up protecting lands that are cheap and far away and not really under development pressure. So is there a way we can be more strategic in how we protect these lands, identify and protect these lands? Okay, the way we did this was we engaged with about 80 stakeholders from around our 2 study areas in focus groups and survey work back and forth to develop some of our models. We looked at 4 main land use sectors. So these are the land uses that are really important in our study area. We looked at forestry, conservation, agriculture, and development. We used Bayesian networks to model land suitability for these 4 different land uses. And just very briefly, what we did was we started with spatial data. About 100 different data sets go into the models that we used. We worked with our stakeholders in the focus groups to develop these expert models of how lands are valued or found to be suitable for different types of land uses. And just as an example here, it's probably hard to tell, but it starts off at right at the first horizontal box of all land available for development. And we asked the developers, irrespective of of specific locations, what makes land valuable for development. And they said things like, well, we want to be near roads, we want to be near population centers, we want to be near schools. All those things go into these models that then runs through the software called Netica and creates a spatial depiction. And in this particular case, it's development suitability for commercial development. And not surprisingly, it's focused around our main metropolitan center, Bangor, Maine, and then the road network, and that makes sense. So once we do those models for all 4 land uses, we can start to go and explore different scenarios going forward. And we can look at a base scenario. If we just keep doing what we're doing, this is what our future might look like. Or we can look at a sprawl scenario, or we can look at a smart growth scenario, or we can look at any range of scenarios. High population increases, low population increases. Okay, so normally that's where we would have stopped as academics. We would have published our work, and we would have hoped somebody picked it up and took it to the next step. But part of what we're doing is we're trying to link knowledge with action. So we're trying to get off this loading dock view of academia where we produce the knowledge and put it on the back loading dock and hope someone picks it up. We wanted to take it the next step. And we did that 2 ways. First, we worked with Maine Public Broadcasting and put together a 30-minute TV special on the work we're doing. It's called Preserving Paradise. You can go and look at it and download it. I tend to watch it about every night before I go to sleep. Really get me sleepy? No. And then the other thing we did was we created a Maine Futures Community Mapper. And this shows the power of students. One of our students in the team who's sitting out here, Spencer Meyer, wrote a proposal to get funding from the Sewell Foundation to go ahead and take all this research and package it into something that people could actually use. And what I want to do now is just real quickly show you some of the things that this website will do. So there's the home page for the Maine Futures Community Mapper. At the end I'll have the web address. But you can look at the current condition now, and you can look across these 2 very large 4 million acre watersheds all together, or you can focus in. And this focuses in on the area around Bangor, Maine. Red is development. We've got ag lands in the lighter color, and then forest in green. This map shows suitability for conservation. So the darker the green, the higher the conservation value for this landscape. This shows ag land suitability. And once again, this is based on working with about a dozen farmers and extension agents and things like that to come up with these attributes that make land important for agriculture. This shows development potential. Red is already developed. The darker the blue, the higher the development suitability. So if you take all these things together, you can start to ask some pretty obvious questions. And the first one here is, what are the conflicts between conservation and development? In other words, where do we have high-value development lands that are also high-value conservation lands? And here in the purple, you can see those areas where we've got high-value conservation, high-value development. This is where we're going to have fights, right? This is where we're going to see conflicting values. If we focus in on one area, there we are close up. This happens to be the area, the Bangor Mall area, right outside of, just north of town. Interstate I-95 runs through it, and if you look at what's going on conservation-wise in Bangor, in northern Maine, this is where most of the concern is. Now, keep in mind, this was identified spatially. We didn't ask people where's the important area, and they didn't circle on a map Bangor, which means we can take the lessons learned here and leapfrog ahead into other areas of the state and identify similar conditions. We can have conflicts between different land uses, but we can also have opportunities. This map shows where we have high-value conservation land and high-value development land. So here we can see conservationists and developers working together to try, conservationists and agriculturalists working together to try to protect lands. We can zoom in on an area there where we see a lot of high-value ag land, a lot of high-value conservation land, and it looks pretty important. Well, if we look at the proposed extension for the I-395 highway system, it goes right through that area. So those are the same areas that Maine DOT is looking for. So we can start to try to quantify the impacts and identify these areas that are likely to be contentious. And then, when I talk to a lot of planners, they're tired of conservationists saying no, so we wanted to be able to say yes. This map in blue shows areas highly suitable for development that are not highly suitable for forestry, agriculture, and conservation. So here's where we can encourage development, where we have roads and sewers and streets and schools and all those things. And then we came up with a number of different future scenarios. So here's our current condition. This is the first scenario with projected development and projected scattered conservation, which is the model that's prevailed in the past. Here's a smart growth scenario with concentrated conservation. You'll see the difference in the purple primarily. So a lower human footprint and more aggregated conservation. So we can explore different types of scenarios. Okay, so how can students serve as conservation catalysts? We took our results to the Acadia program. This is a program we've run for about 4 years at Acadia National Park. And we asked them basically, here's our study area. We've been looking at the landscape. At the same time, the Penobscot River Restoration Trust has been looking at the river, taking out dams and opening up 1,000 miles of river to threatened and endangered species. What should we do next? And it took the students to say, well, this is all really one big thing. It's one big project. You know, we're segregated in what we've been looking at, but it needs to be looked at together. And from that came this idea from the students of a Bay to Baxter initiative. And this is something that would work along the entire corridor, that would try to link the coastal tourism with the inland areas that are economically very depressed. It would build on the dam restoration, river restoration work, Baxter State Park, and the end of the Appalachian Trail as being key green infrastructure points, and then proposals for a new national park and national recreation area. So how can we pull all that together? And then a dual mission of economic development and protecting and leveraging quality of place. The next thing we did was this past summer, we have an Upward Bound program on campus where students come in. These are high school students that come in. They're hopefully going to be first generation college students. And we presented the Beta Baxter idea to them, and 3 of the 5 student groups chose to work with Beta Baxter. And the first developed a phone app. The next developed oral histories for the area. And then the last developed tourism and marketing materials for this region. Okay, so what are some of the lessons learned? Well, obviously, academia has a lot to offer in working with RCPs and vice versa. We're concerned about conserving natural resources and quality of place. We're very concerned with fostering student and community engagement. How do we continue to be relevant and build our relevance? And then service learning opportunities and place-based research. These institutions bring incredible capacity in the sense of faculty, students, funding, and alumni. We've got a 150-year land grant mission, a lot of us do, of bringing this work to the communities. And then if you think about it, Wildlands and Woodlands is a great model, example of how this could work. And we've got a new grant right now that's looking at future forest scenarios across the entire New England region. Okay, so what are ALPiNE's next steps? First, we're going to start inventorying lands and programs at all academic institutions, and we're starting that right now. Next, we want to work to connect educators and students to the RCPs with internship opportunities, jobs, things like that. We want to build on institutionalizing conservation, landscape conservation as part of the university mission. Right now, there's a lot of work in institutionalizing sustainability. This is a natural complement to that. And then we want to also try to work with creating student RCP groups, possibly with annual conclaves and things like that. Establish metrics so we can track impacts and outcomes associated with this land conservation work in the community. And then foster the creation of additional networks in the U.S. and abroad, which brings me to this shameless promotion. Jim's book is out. He's actually in Sydney right now. But, oops, somebody put this in here. I don't know how that got there. And I'm out of time, but 3 last things. You have a homework assignment. Assess academic institutions in your area. Identify key personnel and programs and work with them. And then connect, collaborate, and conserve, because we've got a lot to do. And with that, our study team, Spencer's here, Chris Cronin, Michelle Johnson, Dave Owen, and Thomas Parr. We're all very much engaged in creating that mapper. And that's all I've got. So thank you.